What's up everybody, and welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Wherever you are today, I hope you're keeping safe and keeping sane. You guys, this week is going to be a little bit different. I know you're used to normally having 5 to 8 big stories and it coming out on the weekend. Unfortunately, it has to go a little bit differently this week. As you guys know, what we've been talking about the last few weeks, there has been heavy rainfall and flood risks all across the country, with several major places like Chongqing, for example, already being hit pretty hard. Well, unfortunately, where I live, they've had to open the floodgates at a reservoir because of the heavy rainfall. And unfortunately, there is a possibility over the next few days that this area may have to be evacuated. Because of that, this weekend, if I did have to leave, I wouldn't be able to do this over the weekend. So what I've done is I've quickly put together a shorter version on Thursday, and I'm filming this Thursday night in my bedroom where I normally film stuff. So we're just going to be looking at a few big stories. We need to touch on Hong Kong and some developments in the China-US relationship, and then a few other smaller matters. So that's what this episode is going to be like today. It's going to be a little bit shorter, a bit more rushed. Sorry about that. I think I'll be okay, guys, but hopefully you do enjoy what we go through today. And as always, if you do enjoy the content, make sure you smash that like button, because the algorithm does not like YouTubers that upload with a VPN within China. They think I'm a bot, so that like is a huge help. Before we jump into the main stories, just a couple of little mini updates to put at the front of the episode before we jump into the main stories. The first is that the college entrance Gaokao exam started on Tuesday, and as of the filming of this, it is finished for almost all of the students. It's one of the most stressful weeks for Chinese students, and this year it was postponed because of the pandemic earlier in the year. The second point, something that I want to talk about a lot more next week, because it does touch on an important aspect of China's economic policy, is that Tuesday saw a 6% jump in the CSI 300 stock market index within China after a week of state-run articles talking about an upcoming bull market. The day of the surge, WeChat searches for the term bull market were up 20 times, and many, again, the state media were talking about this being the beginning of a long bull run, calling for people to invest into stocks. About 5 years ago, state media also called on people to invest in the stock market to see returns leading up to the 2014 and 2015 bubble, which then popped, resulting in a 40% collapse in prices. Okay, with those two smaller points out of the way, let's jump into the main stories this week on China Update. First up, of course, we need to talk about Hong Kong and the developments in relation to the controversial national security law, what's going on the ground, what's happening in the mainland, and what has the international reaction been into this week. This week, Hong Kong's new 200-person strong National Security Office was officially opened. Also this week, the government clarified that Article 43 of the new national security law gives the police new powers over the dissemination of information online, with the Hong Kong Free Press reporting that when police have quote-unquote reasonable grounds to suspect online information may lead to national security crimes, they may require the relevant publisher or provider to remove the online content. This and other provisions have some major US and other international technology companies in a tricky position, and several major companies have said that they are temporarily refusing to comply with the new requirements under the national security law. A further serious complication for major tech companies like Facebook and Google is that through the application of Articles 38 and 43, Hong Kong authorities are empowered to request data and action on any account located anywhere in the world that engages in online activity that the Hong Kong authorities says violate the national security law. Article 38, of course, is the extraterritorial clause which we discussed in last week's episode, which states that the law shall apply to any person in or outside the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, so anywhere in the world, really. Like I said, the implementation rules for Article 43 were released on Monday, and it looks like authorities could require actions by internet firms which would face penalties if they don't comply. So the decisions that these technology companies have to make will directly affect all of us, including you. Interestingly, this week TikTok, which is of course owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, announced that it was pulling out of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. It's not just online material that is being affected by the new law. This week, 2 schools and libraries were ordered to remove books breaching the security law. Quote, In accordance with the 4 types of offences clearly stipulated in the law, the school management and teachers should review teaching and learning materials in a timely manner, including books. End quote. The book removals were discussed on state-run television within the mainland earlier in the week. Quote, "We all know that some foundational educational material in Hong Kong is filled with poison, and this poison must be cleaned away to clean the source." End quote. Last week, Canada suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong and halted exports of sensitive military goods to the city. It also issued warnings that travellers to the city could face risks of arbitrary arrest and potential extradition to mainland China. In response, Beijing issued a warning to its own citizens that travelling to Canada is dangerous. This is similar to a warning that Chinese citizens received from their government a few weeks ago, warning against travelling to Australia. Members of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, an organization which we discussed 3 weeks ago in the episode, which you should check out. If you don't know this organization, it is very important if you do follow China. The Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China have been calling on their respective countries to suspend their extradition agreements with Hong Kong after the new law had, quote, severely undermined the rule of law, end quote. Officially, Beijing's foreign ministry continues to maintain a positive and optimistic tone. Quote, "I recall when Deng Xiaoping noted in 1982 when he met Margaret Thatcher, after Hong Kong's return to the mainland, horses will still run, stocks will still sizzle, and dancers will still dance in Hong Kong. We have every reason to believe that as the law is implemented, the foundation of one country, 2 systems will be further strengthened. The Hong Kong residents' fundamental interests and well-being will be better protected. The society will be more stable and harmonious. The horses will run faster, stocks will be more sizzling, and dancers will dance more happily. We have full confidence in Hong Kong's future." End quote. Not everybody is as peachy with their language, however. The sole president of the Modern Think Tank Forum, who has been described as a hardliner in Beijing, discussed the national security law as a blueprint for Taiwan and a critical step towards the island's quote-unquote liberation. Quote, "We will learn how to control Taiwan by experimenting with this law on Hong Kong. And from the experiment on Hong Kong, we will tell the people on Taiwan that after we forcibly unite with you, we will have a way to deal with you." Okay, the next big thing we need to talk about are some major developments in the China-US relationship, which I want to touch on here. So let's start with the somewhat bad news and then we'll move on to the really bad news, shall we? US media reports this week that while China has made progress on its agricultural and manufacturing targets, it remains far behind its purchase targets for oil, natural gas, refined petroleum products, and coal. For those of you who have been watching for several months now will know that at the end of last year, when the so-called Phase 1 trade agreement was concluded, I said at that time that it was highly unlikely, based on the numbers, that the Chinese side was going to meet those energy targets. This week, the DC-based Peterson Institute for International Economics pushed back against the idea that the US and China are undergoing a financial decoupling with a piece titled, "Despite the rhetoric, US-China financial decoupling is not happening," saying, quote, "China's integration into global financial markets continues apace. Indeed, that integration appears on most metrics to have accelerated over the past year, and US-based financial institutions are actively participating in this process, making financial decoupling between the United States and China increasingly unlikely. An examination of the data shows the danger of generalizing based on misleading anecdotal evidence." End quote. Derek Scissors of the American Enterprise Institute isn't as optimistic, however, writing this week in a separate report that there is going to be at least a partial financial decoupling. On the Chinese side of the Pacific, it seems that the mainstream position among Chinese scholars and intellectuals is increasingly that China and the US are either entering or already in a Cold War. And of course, they blame the United States. In a survey of academics published by the Beijing-based think tank, the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies at Renmin University, 62% of respondents to the survey agreed when asked, quote, "Is the US launching a new Cold War against China?" End quote. 90%, however, believe that China can manage this situation. The report concludes, quote, At present, Chinese scholars generally believe that the US political circle has reached a domestic consensus to be tough on China. And, quote, the US seems to be willing to accept a lose-lose situation in order to suppress China, end quote. Interestingly, the report doesn't touch too much on why the US, or anyone else for that matter, may want to actually be tough on China. Most concerning, however, according to the survey, almost 1/3 of those academics that were surveyed agreed that, quote, military conflict between China and the US is inevitable, end quote. And on that, let's look at the military matters. Likely in response to China holding large-scale drills around the disputed Paracel Islands, over the weekend, US aircraft carriers, the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Nimitz, completed hundreds of launches of jets, surveillance planes, and helicopters in the South China Sea. This week, the director of the United States FBI gave a speech which I believe gives an excellent outline of how the US law enforcement / intelligence community views China now. It's worth quoting some of the speech here to get a picture of that view. In his speech, he said, quote, "We need to be clear-eyed about the scope of the Chinese government's ambition. China, the Chinese Communist Party, believes it is in a generational fight to surpass our country in economic and technological leadership. That is sobering enough. But it's waging this fight not through legitimate innovation, not through fair and lawful competition, and not by giving their citizens the freedom of thought and speech and creativity that we treasure here in the United States. Instead, China is engaged in a whole-of-state effort to become the world's only superpower by any means necessary," end quote. Okay guys, 2 more quick stories and that will be it for this week. I am sorry that it is rushed. I promise next week, unless there is a major flood, I will give you guys a proper episode. Next up, technology update within China. So the Nikkei Asian Review reported this week that China has quadrupled its funding to domestic chip makers in order to accelerate its policy goal of chip self-sufficiency, with over $20 billion of funding allocated already this year. Huawei did not have a good week. It hasn't had a good week for a long time, I think. This week saw more signs that Huawei is facing increasing scrutiny in Europe, particularly in Germany and in the United Kingdom. And to TikTok now, both Australia and the United States are considering banning the application, the Chinese app TikTok, responding to a question. US Secretary of State Pompeo said, "I don't want to get out in front of the president, but it's something we're looking at," here referring to whether they will ban the controversial application. The following day, US President Trump told a reporter, quote, "It's something we're looking at, yes," end quote. On the subject last week, we discussed India's ban of mostly Chinese apps, including the popular TikTok and WeChat. Well, TikTok's owner, ByteDance Limited, believes this week that the ban will cost the company approximately $6 billion. A ban in the United States would be even more devastating to the company's bottom line. Speaking of India, let's finish out this episode with an update on the Sino-Indian border dispute. We may be seeing de-escalation, but of course this episode is still ongoing. What do we know from this week? Well, China's state-run Xinhua news media made the following statement on Monday of this week, saying, quote, "Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a telephone conversation on Sunday evening with Indian Special Representative National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, during which the two sides reached positive consensus on easing their border situation." And using much more conciliatory language than a few weeks ago, they went on to say, quote, "Wang also expressed his hope that the Indian side will meet China halfway," end quote. Now on Monday, Indian media was reporting that according to Indian government sources, the Chinese military was seen dismantling tents and equipment, as well as other structures at the site of the Galwan Valley, near to where the latest deadly escalation took place several Monday nights ago. Okay guys, I'm sorry that's quite rushed. I had to draft that a few days earlier than I'm used to, and I have to prepare for maybe leaving this area. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll have a proper episode for you guys next week, I promise. Let me know what you think, if you have any feedback about what we went over today, if you disagree with my analysis, or if you think there's something I should have covered or put at the front of the episode. Let me know in the comments below. Wherever you are, I hope you're staying safe and sane and dry if you're somewhere that is experiencing flooding. I will see you guys next week on China Update.